Hi, Dad.
Hello, son.
Premier League 2023 is finished now, and Man City obviously champions 3 weeks ago when Arsenal were 8 points clear, and now Leeds and Leicester are relegated. We're going to go through a lot of the teams, their seasons, and we're going to do some little awards things. So we're going to do Player of the Season, Manager of the Season, in our opinion, Flop of the Season, maybe most underrated player, overrated player, and I think that's it. We can't really do much more. Man City, the champions, they could do the treble. Do you think they will do the treble?
Yes, I think they will. They look unstoppable at the moment. They're playing really well. And, in some ways, a team this good sort of deserves it, really. They are. Yeah. I mean, they're miles ahead of everyone. I know Arsenal have run them fairly close for some of this season, but as soon as they had to step it up, they did. I think they'll have too much for Man United, too much for Inter Milan, and they'll take the treble. And then maybe the financial fair play stuff will kick in. It'll all be taken off them.
Maybe.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But they've been worthy winners so far this season. So
yeah, especially with Haaland. And you talk about how Haaland's got, what is it, 36 now in the Premier League?
Something like that. I've lost
30,
count.
38, 39. And I was talking before about Kane, how I think he's got 29 goals or something. He scored 43% of Spurs' 70 goals this season, which is unreal. And he would have won the Golden Boot. If he did that every other season, he would have won it about 90% of the time. That was one of the stats that...
He's been a one-man team, hasn't he? A lot of the season. Spurs have been an absolute debacle, which has been painful to watch. Not really. No, so, okay.
Yeah. Should we go on to Arsenal? Because they've had... Some people would say they've had a really bad season because they bottled the league. Some would say that because everyone predicted them not to be even in the top 4 or maybe top 6, that they've had a good season because they've finished second. What do you think? Do you think they've bottled it, or are you somewhere in the middle?
No, I think overall they've had a fantastic season. I don't think anyone really saw Arsenal. I mean, you have to look. If you look at the title race this season, if it wasn't for Arsenal, it wouldn't even have been a race, would it?
Yeah.
Would have been like a stroll for Man City. So at least somebody, not the team we expected, but somebody's been there to push them. I think with Arsenal, I think they've lost it twice really. I think they lost it in the January transfer window because I think the squad was too thin, and they probably needed to add another 2 or 3 big players to kick on. They've just looked knackered really from about April onwards, and I think that's how. Some of those games that they were winning comfortably that have ended up in draws, I think if they had more squad depth, I don't think that would have been happening. I think that's where they've lost it really. Lost it in January in the window, and then lost it again when they've run out of steam in April. But overall, the other thing about Arsenal is it's such a young team, isn't it? It's a young team, so they would hope, if I was an Arsenal fan, I'd be looking at that and thinking that's a team that could challenge for the title for the next five years.
Yeah,
I don't think they will.
You
but
need,
they could.
especially in a title race against Man City, you do need experienced players who have done it before. And Jorginho and Xhaka are the only sort of older players in the starting 11, maybe. But yeah, going into next season, they could do exactly what they did next season, and obviously talk about how every team's going to get better. Man U are, Newcastle are. Maybe even Chelsea and Spurs, you never know. Liverpool definitely are. And Arsenal, with what they've done this season, the confidence boost going into next season. It was a good way to end it as well, winning 5-0 against Wolves.
Yeah.
They did that last season, I think, when they bottled the top 4 and then finished it off with a 5-1, 4-0 win against Everton on the final day.
I mean, it was a great performance by kids, wasn't it, who... once the pressure's off them and they can play their football, enjoyed it. But once the pressure kicked in from about February time, they didn't look like the same team, did they? They started to look leggy and struggle really. I think it's a massive. I know we're not talking about next season too much, but I think it's a massive transfer window for Arsenal. Yeah. Because we've seen they've got a core of good players, but they have to build on that. Otherwise, teams like Newcastle, Man United, Liverpool again will just overtake them.
Yeah, they will. And players like Declan Rice could go. I think Cancelo was one of the a link, although links are
Yeah,
always
well,
a bit dodgy with that.
Arteta continues to build the Man City B team
Yeah.
so that he can guarantee second in the league. Yeah.
So let's move on. Newcastle in third, which has sort of been, obviously, maybe the first half of the season it was all, but then people just got used to it and it wasn't really praised as much. And it's a huge achievement for Newcastle, And some of the players that have come on, obviously Almiron, who's gone a bit off it now. They brought in Trippier, who's been brilliant this season, probably in everyone's team of the season right back spot. I don't know who else would.
No.
Do you think there's anyone else even competing for that?
No, I don't really. Unless you were going to put John Stones there or something because you'd got too many other centre backs. But no, as an out and out right back, he's been outstanding.
Yeah, and Bruno Guimaraes from Lyon as well. But can Newcastle? Well, obviously they'll be in the Champions League next season as well. Can they keep this run up and keep it on for a fairly long time?
I mean, I think they can. I think they've got the quality. I mean, what Eddie Howe's done this season is fantastic because they haven't. Yeah. It's not like they've just brought in a raft of big name players. They've brought in good players and he's made them better.
Yeah, competitor for manager of the season maybe.
I think he'd be in my top 3 or 4, definitely. Yeah. Because it's easy to say, well, they've got the money now, they can do it. But you have to look at Chelsea and Tottenham. Having the money is no guarantee that you can become a good team. And he's built them on playing really good football as well. They're a good team to watch. They work hard, play good football. So I think he deserves a lot of credit. And I think it's going to be really interesting next season to see what they're like. Because again, I go back to the same thing. Next season, there's going to be 7 or 8 teams that think they should be in the top 4. And Newcastle will be one of them now. So, can he kick on from where they are?
Yeah. I mean, it's never only Man City are the team that are in the top 4 now that was in last season. Yeah. Because last it was Chelsea, Man U and Spurs, the other 3. Move on, though, to Man U, who started the season quite shaky with, obviously, the 4-0 loss to Brentford and the 4-1 loss to Brighton, was it? Or 4-2?
Yeah.
At the Amex. But do you think it's mostly Ten Hag that has bounced them back, halfway through the season? Or...
I think. Well, no. I think you've got to look at. He's got the best out of Rashford, hasn't he? I mean, Rashford looked like a completely different player this season, and you've got a player that good playing that well. So there's always been goals in the team. Casemiro, I think, was one of the signings of the. Quietly one of the signings of the. Was it last summer they signed him? Was it last summer?
I think January.
Yeah, January was it? Yeah. So one of the signings of the window. I think they've been good. I mean, they've had some, they've just been up and down still, haven't they? They've done enough to finish comfortably top 4 in the end. But again, I think some of that's about other teams perhaps not having such good seasons. They're still a long way off challenging for the title. But with the sort of players they're looking to sign, if they do get Kane,
next few years, maybe.
I think so. But I don't think. It depends, really. Again, it depends what business they do, and of course, there's a lot happening behind the scenes, isn't there? There's talk about
takeovers and everything.
If they get the sort of takeover they're looking at, again, they'll be super competitive. But at the moment, I still feel like they're not quite they're not the scary Man United they used to be. Do you know what I mean? You still feel like there's a bit of a soft underbelly. Do you know what I mean? And that if you frustrate them and keep them out, there's always a chance you've got against them, whereas you never used to feel like that against Man United. They would roll you over. You know what I mean? You always feel like you're in a game now. It doesn't scare you when Man United come to your ground like it used to.
The real Red Devils it was.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So I think they're a better team than they were a year ago. There's no doubt about that. And Ten Hag's done great things, and he's dealt with some tough issues this season. Like, look at all the Ronaldo stuff that he dealt with. Everyone's sort of forgotten about that now, but he dealt with that. He's got the best out of Rashford. He's made good signings. He's turned some players that look bang average into decent looking players. The next thing is, can he make the signings to take them on? And let's see.
I mean, there was never really any doubts about them getting top 4.
No.
The only one I can remember in this sort of second half of the season, after January and everything, is when they slipped up against West Ham, I think. and maybe a few more games, and it was whether Liverpool, if they'd, what people would say is bottle it against Wolves and Chelsea, and Liverpool would just snatch it at the end, but that was never
No,
looking too likely.
no. Well, I think that was more down to Liverpool's problems really than than Man United being particularly brilliant. But yeah, I think it's been a decent season for Man United. They'll expect to kick on from here, won't they? But there's a big gap still between them and City, so got a lot to do to get the sort of consistency they need.
Liverpool, who finished fifth, who looked like maybe not even getting Europe at one point of the season. How have they bounced back? Because it looked like it was all just going completely downhill for them, and I think it was people were saying about the 7-year curse of Klopp. Being at a club for 7 years is always, but Firmino's actually been all right at the end of the season with his last few games. Salah's going on an uphill trajectory now, and Nunes is sort of starting to show good signs. Like Paqueta, how he was sort of a footballer throughout the season when we signed him, but now he's showing signs of being a really good player. So Liverpool have managed to do that and got fifth with it. So fair play to them. What do you think about it?
I mean, yeah, fair play to them. They've shown a lot of character because they could have gone the way of Chelsea, the way they were sort of midway through the season. It could have been a collapse. And I think it's helped them that some of their key players have come back at the crucial time of the season. Jota, I think, is really important for them. I know he hasn't had a great sort of second half of the season, but Diaz coming back and just a few. I think ultimately Klopp has got to do a rebuild, though. I think
fix their midfield.
All the money that's been spent has been spent on sort of attacking players, and so they've got this wealth of attacking talent. They've got sort of 5 or 6 brilliant forwards, and they haven't necessarily invested in the same way in the midfield. I don't know whether that's because he thought his young players were going to kick on more than they have, or whether he thought that there was perhaps a couple more really good seasons in some of the players he got, but. I mean, the midfielders just look miles off. They just haven't been on it the way they have been in the past.
Thiago's had a really, really bad season compared to what he has been doing. Fabinho, who's just gone off it as well. And then you've got the likes of Milner and Henderson that are a bit too old now. Do you think they need someone like a McAllister or... Well, Bellingham's not. Bellingham's got off to Real Madrid now, but those sort of players.
I think they need players of that calibre if they want to jump from where they are this season back into being competitive, and I think that's what Liverpool demand now. They expect now, after what Klopp's done in the first, so far, they expect to be a top 3 team every season, and they've been a long way off that this season. In fact, they've never looked like being a top 3 team, have they? But it's whether without Champions League next season, whether he can attract the sort of players. Liverpool isn't London. I know some people won't like me saying that, but it doesn't have the same draw for everyone. So can he attract the sort of players in midfield that are going to help him kick on, and can he reinvent that team? Because ultimately a lot of that squad, for the last sort of 3 or 4 years has been the same core players, hasn't it? And now, Van Dijk, who's probably been one of the best defenders in the world, he's not looking the same player as he was. So that kind of core down the middle, and even Salah, who's looking back on form, but I think he's probably hit his peak now. He's got a big rebuild to do, and it's how he gets the balance right between keeping the best of what he's got, but bringing in what he needs, in a way that makes sense.
And now Brighton in 6th with the De Zerbi masterclass. They lost Potter, they lost Cucurella, which was maybe one of their best players, and they've brought in De Zerbi, who's done a way better job. Potter, who they thought was, they were almost in tears when he left to go to Chelsea, and obviously what he did at Chelsea was a bit. And now they've got De Zerbi, and he's probably from what I can remember, been their best manager. He's got him Europa League football after a draw to City at home, with Ensensio's brilliant goal. and it's been a really good season for them. Maybe one of the best seasons in the league. Just
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
king is dead. Long live the king.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what's happened with their managers. They've been incredible. I mean, of all the teams, there's a few teams that have had great seasons, and credit. But what I love about Brighton is it's been coming, hasn't it, for a few years?
Yeah.
They've just built a little bit each time, and then what he's done with them. I mean, that goal they scored against City. The number of passes they made
know.
before that, it was absolutely joyous to watch. It was like watching City be out-cityed
Yeah.
by little Brighton. It was incredible. So, I can't. I mean, as a West Ham fan, they drive me mad because we couldn't
Yeah.
beat them if we had
Oh,
50
they're
players.
just-
So,
They're our bogey team, aren't they?
they're more than a
I know.
bogey team. They're a blooming entire snotty tissue
Yeah.
full of.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're awful to play against,
I
but
know.
but they fully deserve where they are, and I really hope they kick on because they're great to watch. Whether they can keep hold of the players now, I mean, they've lost
know.
players before, and
They're-
it's looked like they're in trouble, and then they've just replaced them, or with
With
better
it,
players,
yeah.
or so maybe they'll be able to keep doing that. But crikey, there'll be a lot of big clubs now looking at the likes of McAllister.
Yeah.
A few of the other players that have been superb this season and throwing money at them. So they've got a different sort of challenge. Other teams are kind of, who do we want? They've got to fend people off, keep that squad together if they can.
McAllister as well, World Cup winner this season,
Incredible.
going into Europe,
Yeah.
and De Zerbi's now got them playing this really entertaining brand of football, and it's it's just really good to watch.
Yeah.
It's like when the Amex now, when you come to Brighton, when I was doing my predictions on a little predictor, and it was Brighton City, and I thought even City, this
Yeah.
like machine of a team, is going to be, it's going to be hard to handle Brighton at home, because remember when was it last season or it must have been the season before, where it was the London Stadium was a scary place to go to for the teams,
Yeah.
and we just felt,
Invincible,
Really-
didn't we?
yeah, we
for a
did.
bit,
and
yeah. Brighton
well,
must
that's
feel like
how
that.
Brighton
Yeah, I mean, I
feel.
think it's interesting to see next season how they get on in Europe. First of all, how they actually perform in Europe, because they could give anyone a game on the day.
They could.
And in the Europa League, they could win it. They'll be competitive in that.
You've got
in that
Sevilla.
tournament.
They
Yeah.
could beat Liverpool. I
Yeah.
think they have. Have they? They have done
Yeah,
this season.
they
I
have,
think
yeah.
Sevilla, who are probably one of the, I don't know, between Sevilla and Roma tomorrow, but we'll see. But Sevilla, they could give them a good game.
I think
as well.
Brighton could beat either of them on the day. So it's going to be interesting to see. But so fair play to them. Will it be just that sort of one dream season,
Yeah.
or can they kick on from here?
Especially-
and, especially if we know from our experience with West Ham playing on a Thursday night and then a Sunday. If you
Yeah.
haven't got a big squad, that's quite tough. And Brighton have kept to a fairly tight opening and start for sort of first 11, haven't they, this season?
Yeah.
So whether they can, we'll see. But I mean, in terms of teams that have overachieved this season, I think Brighton are possibly the biggest.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about Thursday. Imagine though, for now, Newcastle in the Champions League and Brighton in the Europa League.
Yeah.
Coming to their grounds on a Thursday night, under the lights,
Yeah.
that would be very, very tough. Especially Brighton and Newcastle on their day.
Yeah.
Was it Newcastle beating 4-1 when it
Yeah.
was that Friday night or Thursday
Yeah.
night, because we went to watch the Europa League game, Conference League game. But we'll move on to Villa, who, under Unai Emery, I think, what did you say, second in form?
I think they are, yeah. I think there's only Man City now. Since Emery took over, and certainly since Christmas, I think there's only Man City that have been on better form. So, if the league had started at Christmas, Villa would be second and running them quite close for
Yeah.
the title now. He has done a remarkable job, really, because that team looked, just bear in mind they'd seen off, two managers. They'd seen off Dean Smith, they'd seen off
Yeah.
Steven Gerrard, and the fans were starting to talk about, is this team just not able to perform for the manager?
When they were they could have been
Yeah,
relegated.
they were. They were 15th, I think, when he took over, and only like a point above relegation. And he's just created, you know, he's found a style of football that works for them, and he's just delivered it, hasn't he? Now, whether they can again, you know, whether they can kick on next season from here, there'll be another one, won't they? There's only so many clubs that can kick on. But yeah, I mean, for them to get into the Conference League from where they were, you know, I know they've got to play a qualifier, but it's absolute dream territory for Villa. And do you know what I'm really pleased about this season, just whilst we're still on this? Newcastle, Brighton, Villa, that's 3 sets of fans that a year ago would never have been expecting European football on a Thursday night. You know, and now they've all got it to look forward to next season, and we know from our own experience how good that is. You know, having European games at your home ground in the week. Whether it affects their league form next season, who knows? But yeah, and you know, the other thing with Villa, I think,
they
is
could win it as well.
They're another team that, certainly the Conference League.
I mean, imagine, obviously, teams coming down from the Europa League would be a threat, but you know, the teams in there that we have, Anderlecht and you know Ghent, and they're easily beatable for Villa on the day.
Of course they are. I think what he's done very well, Emery, is he's taken players that looked average and got the absolute best out of them. You know, people like Watkins who've been inconsistent, Ramsey who's been inconsistent. You know, he's turned them into John McGinn. You know, all these players that could be good on their day, and suddenly he's turned them into consistently good quality players, and all of a sudden nobody wants to play with them.
And they've got a brilliant Martinez in goal.
They've got Martinez. They'll do well to keep him this summer.
They will.
But yeah, so it's going to be interesting for next season. But I think they deserve, you know, after Brighton, along with Brighton and Newcastle, really, I think, you know, Villa deserve the most credit this season for me.
Yeah, and now Spurs, who every team that we can talk about has had a unique season in one way or another. You know, there's always something to say about them. And Spurs are one of the. They had to sack their interim manager at one point. Their second assistant manager coming in for Conte. They had to sack him at one point. Although an emphatic 4-1 win against Leeds on the final day, but can they keep? Is it really an upward trajectory? Do you think from the end of the season?
I think so much depends on whether they can keep Harry Kane.
Yeah.
You know, if they keep him for this next season, then you know he's still probably got a couple of seasons in him where you can build a team around him. He's that good. If they can't keep him, then Spurs just looks like a massive rebuild job, doesn't it? I mean, I know they've got a couple of other good players as well. You know, Son's a good player, and you know they've got one or two others, but they just look a bang average middle of the table side at the moment. If you take out Kane and Son, you know, and the other thing is whatever manager comes in, and they still haven't got one, have they? Still haven't worked out who's going to be in charge next season. You know, he's going to inherit a mishmash of players brought in by different people, because they've had so many managers in the last 2 or 3 years. You know, they've got this sort of hodgepodge of players, and he's just got to find whoever it is. He's going to have to find something from scratch, really, because at the moment they didn't look like they've got any identity. You know, you know, I suppose as a West Ham fan, every season you worry a bit about what Spurs might do. You know, you worry that, is this going to be the season that Spurs kick on, and then you remind yourself it's Spurs.
I know.
So you don't have to worry about it, because it doesn't matter how good they look on paper at any one point.
And it's when you go to White Hart Lane, you've talked about Newcastle and Brighton, how when you go to their ground, it's always a threat, you know, especially if they're on their day. Spurs aren't like that. White Hart Lane, you could easily win at White Hart Lane, you know.
Yeah, I think what was, like last season, what struck me about Spurs before what happened this year was you always got the feeling with their attacking players that at any time they could just blow you away. Do you know what I mean? Like Son and Kane, and you know, and other sort of attacking players they had. You felt like if they turned it on for sort of 20 minutes, they could blow you out the water with 2 or 3 goals, and that happens sometimes. They do that to teams. Whereas this season,
when they went
they did,
2-0 up.
Whereas this season, that just seems to have gone. It's been, you know, so reliant on Harry Kane. Son's been a huge disappointment this season. I really thought he'd kick on after being so good last
Joined
year.
Golden Boot as well last
Yeah,
season.
he was. Yeah, so I don't know. They're another team, but crikey, they've suddenly gone from being a team that looked like they were competing for the top four.
So,
Now it looks like they're the sort of team that's competing with Brighton and Villa,
yeah,
maybe West Ham. maybe one or two of
Brentford.
the. Suddenly competing for sort of seventh place.
Yeah.
And that's not where Spurs fans will expect to be. But really, at the moment, that's where they are. And if they don't have Harry Kane next season, they will be struggling, I think.
yeah.
Because they'll have to rebuild from the bottom up, really. So it's a shame. No, it's not really a shame. It's not really a shame.
Yeah. And then Brentford, who have come in from, was it 2 seasons ago? I remember we watched the game where they played Arsenal and won 2-0 on the first day. And they've now, well, they could have got Europe on the final day if Spurs and Villa lost. And they won against City 1-0. They're the only team this season, I think, who have taken all 6 points from City, which is an achievement in itself, And next season, if you have Villa, Brighton and Liverpool who are having to play on Thursday nights, the players will get fatigued. And you have, obviously Tony's a huge loss, but you have all the Brentford players all up for it on a Saturday or Sunday, then they could get Europe next season. If they carry on this, because didn't they finish about 10th, 11th last season, and now 8th, just coming from the Championship. It's been a brilliant season for them.
Yeah, I mean, he's another one, isn't he, Frank, as a manager?
Yeah.
He's just, everyone thought they'd go back down. They haven't gone back down. They've got better. And you know what? I mean, they play a particular type of football, don't they? They play long ball, long throwing. But they do it so well, and actually, if every team in the Premier League was trying to play the same sort of football, wouldn't be as good to watch. Brentford, it's not always the most attractive stuff, but they know what they're doing. They're so well drilled, and they've just given so many teams big problems this year by just being good at what they do. And, when you look at so many teams that have just been falling apart this season, we've just mentioned Spurs, your Evertons, your Leicesters,
Chelsea.
Chelsea, teams that have got much better players on paper, but just no organisation, no sense of identity, and just generally in a bit of a mess. And Brentford have just gone, this is what we're about, this is what we do. Done it really, really well, and probably finished as high as realistically they could have hoped to finish. And you're right, maybe next season they can kick on again. Tony is a big loss, but, Frank knows he'll know what he wants, and he'll know what replacement he needs. And I think he'll find him. I think they'll be a decent team again next season. They deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna see if it's still filming, but Fulham. Could you talk about Fulham whilst I do that? And signings like Palhinha and Reed, I think, have really helped them, haven't they? And Marco Silva has. Most people thought they would be relegated coming from the Championship, and it's very rare to see a Championship team come in the top half, well, sort of top half, 10th, bang on mid-table, coming from the Championship. Most people would see them being in a relegation battle,
Yeah, it's strange with them, isn't it? Because again, because of where they finished, because they're sort of outside of Europe and nowhere near relegation. I feel like for a lot of the season, people have sort of forgotten about them. Has it worked?
Yeah. The camera's going off.
When did that happen?
Anyway, we can just do the audio. Right, there you go. So, yeah, obviously Fulham with a brilliant season. Was it Chelsea next, or did Palace overtake them? I think Palace.
I think Chelsea, because Chelsea
Chelsea
won
drew
on the
it,
last
didn't they?
day, didn't all
So-
drew on the last day, so they stayed ahead of them.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you say about Chelsea? I mean, I
Yeah,
don't even
just-
know who's in the squad anymore. Like, I
Yeah,
don't,
well,
like,
yeah.
I don't know what their first 11 is. If you said to me, write down the 11 players that have played the most for Chelsea this season,
Yeah.
I would not have a clue. I'd probably get 2 right,
Yeah.
and one of them would be the goalkeeper. So I just think, I don't know what's happened to that club. I mean, I know there's a lot of Chelsea fans out there and commentators that are just as bemused as everybody else.
Yeah.
With the money they've spent. I mean, look, they've got, they've brought in a great manager. So, but I just think it's one of those seasons that they're just going to have to write off as an absolute debacle.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to Rory Jennings say, the Chelsea fan, you know who he is, and he talked about how this is probably Chelsea's worst season ever.
Mm.
He said it's probably worse than the times when they were relegated by Middlesbrough. Remember that?
Mm.
And he said that just because of the togetherness with the fans and the players it's just absolutely like rubbish this season.
Yeah.
You know, and just how Todd Bowley with his recruitment and everything, he's just been really off it, you know. And I think obviously there has been players like Koulibaly, who's been a really bad signing. Reece James, maybe Chilwell, although he has had an injury. Aubameyang, well, there's tons of players you can name that have... Kante's had an injury as well, but when he has played, he hasn't been as good as he could have been. But yeah, it's just been
I mean,
really...
look, as far as I'm concerned, they got rid of a fantastic manager at the start of the season. You know,
Yeah.
I know there was.
I don't know why they did that.
I don't know what made them get rid of.
Because
Super.
he was it 11 points,
Yeah,
and now if
yeah.
they would have got
Yeah.
anyway, but he won the Champions League with them 2 years ago as well.
It's crazy. I mean, if the bar that you're setting at Chelsea is we have to be in the top 2 or 3 all the time, or you're not good enough for us as a manager.
Even when they were playing
big trouble.
Man U or Spurs or Arsenal, I think Arsenal it was. No matter if Chelsea were in like League 1, League 2, they'd because of just the club, the standards, it's Chelsea, they'd give them a game and they'd like work their socks off for it because it's against your rivals like your Spurs, Arsenal, and they just didn't this season. You know,
No, well,
they never looked.
Yeah. I mean, they've brought in so many players. I mean, you know yourself. If you're in a squad of sort of a tight squad of 18 players, you get to know each other, don't you? And you kind of know what your setup is. If you're trying to accommodate 30, 35 players that could all be in the first team, how do you even start? And also, if you're not near the first team, what's the kind of motivation to keep going? Players like Conor Gallagher, who looked, brilliant a couple of seasons or last season for Palace, and then all of a sudden, people like him and people like Mason Mount, who's Chelsea through and through, they just must be looking at it and going,
it's like
what's going on here?
Mason Mount was asking for a pay rise, and all the staff were like, "Oh, why is he doing that?" But you've got players like Aubameyang, who was on 2 times as much money as him, and Sterling was on more, and Koulibaly and everyone. And just talking about the defence as a whole, I think Thiago Silva's been a really vital player for them in the back
I think
line.
genuinely they would have been battling relegation if it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
Because they haven't scored goals.
Even Kai Havertz,
I know. Well, they've managed to do that, special trick of taking lots and lots of quality players and making them look bang average. You know what I mean? Good managers do the opposite. And Chelsea have managed to take a bunch of players that on paper look like world beaters and turn them into, low confidence, low quality, and no real threat.
it just looks
strange.
I was watching. Which one was I watching? I think it was Chelsea Man U. I think so, and they were just getting hammered. It's like Kepa made 5 mistakes where he just passed it straight to Martial or Rashford, and it was just it was rubbish. I don't know how to explain it, but they just couldn't pass. They had no fight for the club, for the badge or anything. It was just all, you just get the ball and...
Yeah, I mean, next season again, well, I suppose because they've got a new manager, he might get time and he might be able to turn it into a sort of project. And, they didn't do that with Potter, did they? They didn't give him time, really. They just kind of wrote him off. after a few months. But, Chelsea will have to kick on quite significantly next season, because if they don't, then again, similar to Spurs, instead of looking like a team you expect to finish in the top four, they'll start to look like a mid-table team.
Yeah.
And that's not, for a lot of Chelsea fans, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, it isn't. And is it Palace now, I think? Palace have... No one really ever thought Palace would get relegated. I think the only team that people thought would definitely and wasn't was maybe Fulham, and definitely Bournemouth. But Palace have... You've not really taken much notice of Palace. They've just been... They've always, like me and you said one time, they've always just been there in like the mid/bottom of the table. They've never been really challenging for Europe or in a full relegation battle. They've always just been there, But has anything stood out this season?
Well, there's a couple of things I think with Palace. I mean, like you say, I think if you drew one of those graphs where you plot a team's position each week, it would almost be a straight line just down the middle of the league from the start to the end. And if I was a Palace fan at the start of the season and you offered me that and you said you're going to finish the season in 13th and you'll never really be in any risk of relegation, I'd probably say thanks very much, I'll take that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, it's not made for the most exciting season, and as you say, everyone's almost forgotten about them. But for a team like Palace, that's a big achievement, because it's so easy. We've seen it with West Ham this season. We've seen it with, your Leicesters and Everton's. It's easy to be one of those teams and drop into the relegation zone. But actually, what they've managed to do, apart from that sort of very brief period when Vieira left and they were starting to look like they were on a bad run of form, they've managed to sort of stave that off. I think what Palace have got, or had this season, is a decent solid defence, but a really exciting attacking centre, sort of front three or four. Eze, Zaha, Elise, one or two others. They've got good attacking options, and therefore, if you've got that group running at you, doesn't matter who you are, defensively that's going to be a hard night's work. So they're going to score goals, and they've got a decent solid defence, so they've got the recipe for a decent team. Can they keep Zaha? I think he's a free agent, isn't he, this summer? People will be looking at Eze now. He's starting to look like a player he's got in the England squad, hasn't he?
Brighton could get him. Him and Mitoma on the wing.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's just been another good, solid Palace season. I'm guessing they'll probably change the manager, so that'll be a big decision. I mean, Hodgson might stop, but in some ways I hope he doesn't, because it's a bit of a fairy tale, him coming back and keeping him up as he has done and playing good football, and just leaving it at that would be sensible. If he tries to do another season, it could all go wrong, couldn't it? So. I think it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep hold, similar to what I was saying really with Brighton. Can they keep hold with the best players? And how can they strengthen the squad? But yeah, a solid season for Palace. There's really, almost every team you can look at and say, well, they've either overperformed or they've underperformed. Palace have almost bang averaged exactly what they would hope for, and so fair play to them.
Yeah, another team that's done exactly that, and that maybe one point this season have been a relegation threat, but have always, as we said, just been there, is Wolves. They've hardly ever been in a European race. This is the only season where, for a fairly big chunk of it, have been in a relegation battle, like a proper one. What do you think of Wolves' season?
Look, I can't pretend to be an expert on Wolves for all the reasons you've just said, really, because they've kind of passed me by. I'm not. If you ask me where did Wolves pick up all their points, I wouldn't be able to remember a single kind of, big win or a single game that's kind of made the difference for them. But they've quietly gone about picking up like the 40+ points they needed. When I've seen them, they've played some decent enough stuff. They've got some good players, haven't they? They've got a strong midfield. Yeah. So again, interesting to see what happens with a team like Wolves. But they're another team, aren't they? Going back to what I was saying before, for a lot of teams this season, it's all been a bit crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Wacky things have happened. Wolves have just stayed steady, and
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said for that.
The only things I can remember of them is the West Ham game, the 1-0 loss, which was, I think that was when we went 3 points deep into the relegation zone, which was, everyone was frustrated. And then the 1-1 against Chelsea, I can't really remember any other massive results.
Got a good win.
Obviously
against
the
Villa, didn't they?
5-0
4.
5-0 battering at the end. But, oh yeah, the win against Villa. But there's nothing really that stands out. Nottingham Forest, who I thought would come 19th. I also thought Bournemouth would get relegated, which is a bit... But, well, now it is. And Forest have...
Isn't it us next? Oh, weren't we
Pardon?
15th? Because wasn't it Chelsea, Palace, Wolves, then us?
Oh yeah, we finished a bit. Let's do Forest though, just quickly. Sorry.
That's all right.
But
I just didn't want to finish below Forest. That would have been.
I know. So they've got some really good upcoming players. Johnson, which is their right back or winger, I think, and Iwoni up top, who's really shown some good signs, and now Navas in goal, which was like a bizarre signing from PSG, but he's really, really performed, and he made he was maybe the player that kept them in the game against City when it was the 1-1 draw. He made about 5 superb saves at the end, and he made one brilliant one against Palace. I saw in the highlights, but Forest are another team that could go either way next season. Do you think it's about recruitment or just confidence in players?
I mean, they're an interesting team, aren't they? So obviously they signed a ridiculous number of players, didn't they, at the start of the season? Do you remember they basically signed about 3 first teams, and people that were already in the first team must have been wondering what was going on. So it was always going to take some time for them to bed those players in.
Did you see the photo of the dressing room?
Yeah, I remember
The
that.
Forest dressing room.
You could hardly get everybody in.
I know.
Yeah, it was bizarre, and what a shame to see that Jesse Lingard's ultimately not being able to get first team football. That's really been
You've
sad
forgotten
to
about
see.
him, haven't you?
I think the entire world's
only-
forgotten about
yeah.
him.
The only things I see of him is like random posts that come up on YouTube from about 5 years ago of him doing a little dance at Man United. This season,
He had a good
he's-
6 months for West Ham. That's all that really.
Yeah, he did.
Anyway.
That's-
I think the thing with Forest, 2 things have really stood out for me. Well, actually, 3 things have stood out for me. So the first is that the fans have stuck by them all season.
Oh yeah.
They've never, a lot of
Remember
people
when
have said
they
this.
stayed up against? Who's it on the last home game? I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Did they stay
They
up
beat
against
Arsenal, didn't they?
Arsenal? Yeah.
Yeah,
And the fans were just.
yeah.
They're
So,
probably
yeah.
one of the best.
So
fan bases I've seen.
most of the fans have at some point they've lost the plot with the manager, or they've just turned on the team, and a lot of those teams have really suffered for that. The Forest fans have stayed with them all season, so fair play to them because they've done that. And then of course they've stuck with the manager. One of the
Yeah.
very few teams in the bottom half that have done that. They've stuck with him, and he's repaid that faith. And as you say, they've got the third thing then. So is that they've got some good attacking players, as you've just said.
Yeah, they have.
And they're a dangerous team on the break, but they're going to have to strengthen defensively, I think, if they're not going to be in trouble again next season. Because they were shambolic away from home for most of the season. I know they managed to pull a few results out towards the end, but I think Forest could struggle again next season unless they can tighten up. I think because they probably won't have the luxury of so many other teams performing badly around them.
Yeah, I was saying about Navas pulling out some brilliant saves, but the reason he's having to do so many of them is because of the shaky defence in front of him. And now West Ham, who if we do win the Conference League, will be not a brilliant season, but close to brilliant season. You know what I mean. So, how do you think it's gone? We got in the transfer window, Paqueta, Aguerd, and Flynn Downs, who have maybe not Flynn Downs so much because he's never been played, but they've looked superb. And Zuma as well. Maybe not Kehrer, he's a bit of a nervy player to watch, but, you know, how do you think the players have come along?
Look, I think if you, at the start of the season, if you could have told me that you'll win the Conference League, and obviously we haven't won it yet, but if you said you can win the Conference League and you'll finish, did we finish 14th or 15th?
15th.
Or 15th. Yeah. I would probably have taken that. I think the way the season's gone, where we've been flirting with relegation for chunks of it, has made it a lot more stressful than it should have been. There's two camps at the moment with West Ham. And it really depends which one you're in. And I think one camp goes, well, David Moyes has kind of reached his peak Moysiness.
Yeah.
You know, he can't play possession football. He tried it. We failed at it. We had to go back to playing teams on the break. And as long as we're always playing teams on the break, the way we have been doing, maybe it will always be quite hard to kind of kick on from where Moyes is, and maybe the only way we could do that would be to change the manager and change things around. And I know a lot of people thought like that for a while. The other take on it would be to say, well, he signed a lot of new players. It's taken a while to bed them in, but now some of them, Paqueta in particular, are showing real signs of quality.
And also with the new manager for players, we've seen it with Chelsea a lot. Having a new manager isn't the best thing for those players. It's like Paqueta could be just settling in with Moyes and Moyes' style, and then suddenly we change it up and he doesn't know what to do. You know.
Yeah, I think overall it hasn't been a great season to enjoy.
Yeah.
We've lost
We've been
a lot
in
of games that we shouldn't have lost, and
18th for a while.
Yeah, there were times in the season when we were nervous, and obviously the Conference League has papered over a lot of the cracks in the league now. But I think overall, because of how the team looks now, because the team looks stronger, because the players that he's brought in are starting to look sharper, and because obviously we may have the prospect of European football again, I think he's probably done enough to earn his shot at it next season. The big thing, of course, this season is we're going to lose Declan Rice, and therefore, there's two things to that. The first is who's going to spend 120 million quid. Who's the manager you want to spend 120 million quid and how they're going to spend it? Is it going to be Moyes? Is Moyes going to, how's he going to spend it? Because his transfers last season are a bit questionable. And then the second thing is, how do we replace him? Because if we're not going to find another Declan Rice, are we?
Yeah. And also, we were sat, in front of these people who were saying, and they were completely right, that Declan Rice will not do the exact same job he has done for West Ham and any other team. No. Because he just fits in perfectly as the playmaker in the team. He can be everywhere. His shot's not brilliant, but he can go forward, and he's just always in the middle. He can get the ball off people brilliantly, and he can pass it brilliantly, because he can get the ball from defence, play it to Paqueta, who'll probably do like a million turns and get past about 10 players, and then just control the game with his passing. And there is like Maddison, Ward-Prowse and that who will definitely be coming back to the Premier League. Players like them can't be in the Championship. Would Maddison be a good replacement? Or would... Because even if we keep Paqueta, Flynn Downs, Souček, but even Flynn Downs and Paqueta, it's not as good as Paqueta and Rice, but it's okay to maybe handle with for a chunk of the season, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, we aren't going to replace Declan Rice. We aren't going to replace what he does for us, so what's important is that we don't try and fill a Declan Rice-shaped hole with a player that isn't as good as Declan Rice is at what he does for us. As you've just said, he runs the game for us in a way that most players couldn't do. So what we've got to do, I think, is rebuild that midfield with a different set of players. If you offered me now, if you said, right, Declan Rice goes, but you can bring in Ward-Prowse and Maddison, and we suddenly had a midfield of Ward-Prowse, Maddison and Paqueta, I wouldn't be too worried about next season. I'd miss Declan, but crikey, we'd have one hell of a hard-working and quality midfield. So, it depends how this plays out. It could be swings and roundabouts, but the important thing is we've got to spend that money well. We've got to make sure that whoever we bring in, and whatever style he switches to when we haven't got Declan Rice, works for us. But the first thing we've got to do is win the Conference League, because the whole mood of the season changes. If we win that, then we go into next season on a high. We've got European football again. We'll be, a good prospect for players that we want to sign, and the mood will be really positive. If we don't win it, then it might be hard to keep hold of some of our best players. We aren't going to be in Europe. We're going to be struggling to get into Europe again in a hurry, and it will ultimately be considered quite a failure of a season. So that Conference League game is huge.
Because also Fiorentina are not an easy team to beat, obviously, but a team that we would have, with the teams in there was Nice, there was, what was the other team?
Napoli, wasn't there? One of the Italian teams, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. But if you would have said Fiorentina in the final instead of one of them, you would have taken it, And I think at the back as well with Zuma and Aguerd, a very, very solid two centre-backs. Although something I just thought about, Scamacca, what's happened to him?
Injured.
So
he's been injured for most of the season. I mean, that's another one of the challenges Moyes is going to have, isn't it? He likes players that play like Michail Antonio. He likes a strong centre forward that can hold it up and can run with the ball, turn and run, and bring players in.
Scamacca isn't.
Don't know if Scamacca is that player. He's definitely got good hold up play, but I don't know if he can turn and run at people the way. Yeah. So the question will be: does he stick with Scamacca and try and work the team around him? Does he even think about two up front and have Scamacca and Ings, or does he cut his losses? And he wanted Broja, didn't he? That's who he wanted last summer, and he didn't get him. Chelsea kept him and then never used him, and now he's injured. So maybe that's something to think about. So all of that, there's a lot of question marks at West Ham for this summer. What will happen to Rice? How does he change the team? Does he, stick or twist with players? Is it even going to be Moyes that makes those decisions? It probably will. But a lot of it depends on what happens in that Conference League. Yeah. Because if we win that as well, you would expect people like Bowen to stay. Wouldn't you? You'd expect Bowen to stay. You'd expect our best players to stay. Bakatar probably will stay to play in Europe and have another season with us in the Premier League. If we don't, people will come in for Bowen, I think. People will come in for Bakatar, because they're good players. So it's a big, big night in lots of regions. We'll be looking at it and thinking we can beat them. They'll be looking at it and thinking they can beat us. Yeah. So really, we're talking about this as an end-of-season review, but West Ham's season
isn't over yet.
It's not over, and the future could rest on what happens on the 7th of June.
Yeah, it could. Now, Bournemouth, who I've seen predictions, I've seen people reacting to their first predictions. Almost like 80% of them had them finishing bottom, and they put a thing out on Twitter. Have you seen it? Where they basically got all the pundits and everyone talking. They're all going, right, Bournemouth relegated, Bournemouth 20th. Oh, Bournemouth are already relegated. They got Rory Jennings going, Bournemouth going down. In other news, water is wet. And then they've just changed it around with, I forgot their name. Gary O'Neill, who's
West Ham player, so, inevitable, really.
Yeah. So, but how have they, because it's not all him, how have they managed to do this? They've sort of got the, I don't know the words for this,
revitalised
the Vitality Stadium as well, isn't it?
Very good.
Revitalise the spirit in the team and the community at Bournemouth. How do you think they've done it? Just turned it around.
I mean, I think they are a classic example of what happens when you build really good team spirit and belief, even if, as a group of players, they're probably not as talented as almost every other team in the league. I'll go back to what I said before. A lot of teams have fallen apart this season in different ways. Bournemouth changed their manager early, which was probably a good move, because he's had time to work with the players, time to build some team spirit.
Well, as well, like West Ham and Forest stick with their managers, and it's turned out to be a good
Yeah, and Bournemouth have done it. I mean, you know, they've made it very difficult to beat them at home. They've pulled off some big results when nobody really expected them to, and basically they've overperformed because of a great team spirit and you know, a well organised team with, you know, who are difficult to beat at home.
Yeah.
You know, they lost 9-0 to Liverpool at the start of the season, and as you said, everybody was writing them off. But you can imagine after that happened, a new manager coming in and going, right, that's not happening again. Do you know what I mean? We're going to tighten up. That's not the team we're going to be. And sometimes you need something to really give you a kick in early in the season to kind of make you shape up. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes some teams drift into relegation. Like Leicester have drifted into relegation. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of nobody really expected it, and then it's happened. You know, and you know, Everton in some ways, even though they've had a couple of bad seasons, you know, again they've sort of drifted into relegation territory. I know they haven't been relegated, whereas Bournemouth, everyone was expecting them to be relegated from the start. So it's as if they've gone, right, you've got to up your game from the off. And they have. Fair play to them, do you know what I mean? They have upped the game from the off. So the mentality has been fantastic. They're going to have to do something to not be in the same position, you know, not be struggling again next season. But fair credit to Gary O'Neill. He's got team spirit. He's brought the best out of some average players. And yeah, he's got the crowd behind him. So they've deserved to stay up.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like a Chelsea team with all that quality, with the spirit of Bournemouth, and the togetherness of Bournemouth, a Brentford or Brighton type team, you know, or Villa type, you know, just all these brilliant teams that have really overachieved this season. And now Everton, who, well, Dyche has probably really, really helped them in staying up. They got a 1-0 win on his first game against Arsenal, which was really good for them, because that really boosted their confidence when you had a new manager coming in. And now they, what was their final day of the season? They beat Bournemouth 1-0, didn't they, to stay up? Think they deserve to stay up?
I think, I mean, it depends how you look at that. In terms of the way the club has been run, probably not. I would have probably thought that Everton deserved to go down a bit more than Leicester. Yeah. But in football terms, you know, whereas Everton changed the manager a little bit earlier and brought in a manager who absolutely knew how to keep a team out of relegation, because he did it for season after season after season with Burnley. You know, Leicester changed the manager a bit later and brought in a manager who, you know, I mean, I like Dean Smith and, you know, respect what he did at Villa, but much more of a gamble. Dyche was a good decision. Yeah, but it was, I think he was the right manager at the right time for Everton. That club is in a mess. You know, that club, and they've been in a mess for a few years now, you know, and, you know, the ownership's messy and the team just can't seem to get going, can't seem to find an identity. They've really, really lacked a striker. You know, Calvert-Lewin was brilliant a couple of seasons ago, and now he's struggling. And you know, who do you bring in to replace him? Morpay, who never scored any goals for Brighton, and has ended up not scoring any goals for Everton either. So, you know, apart from when he played West Ham, he always scored against them, obviously. But, so, you know, I think there's a lot that Everton would need to change to avoid this happening again next season. You know, you look at the individual players, and they probably shouldn't be where they are. But, you know, if this season isn't the final big wake up call, they need to do something. Then, to be honest, I can't see him, you know, surviving again and again and again, because you can't do it. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, Burnley showed that last season, didn't they? You know, you can stay up sort of season after season for a while, but eventually it'll just get you down. And also, they won't be able to attract the players.
And Leeds, it's happened with Leeds this season. And I saw an Everton fan talking about it, and he said that Doucouré has probably been their most attacking player this season. Yeah. And he's a centre. Yeah, he's a CDM. Yeah. So, and Doucouré's a brilliant player. He's a really good signing.
I mean, he'll be another one that's tough to keep hold of.
Yeah, it will.
You know, I'd be quite happy if we had a look at him at West Ham. You know, he's been a good player. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see him. Yeah. You know, I think they're just about deserve to stay up because they just about made the right decisions at the right moments, whereas I don't think Leicester and Leeds did. But yeah, they're going to have to do something this summer if they're not going to be in the same position next year.
Yeah, you can look at it two different ways. You can think we've had the spirit and managed to stay up for 2 seasons in a row now, or you can say we just managed to stay up 2 seasons in a row now, and it can be a positive thing or a negative thing. I think for Everton it's more of a negative thing.
The thing is with Everton, they are historically they're a big club.
Yeah.
You know, they've been in the top league since I think it's 1969.
Yeah.
You know, they've never been relegated in the Premier League era. They've not been relegated for decades before that. You know, they were winning championships in the 80s. You know, when David Moyes was their manager, they were solidly a top 10 club most seasons. They got in the Champions League. And the last few years, they've just been, you know, you can pretty much, when you're right in your bottom 7, you can guarantee Everton are going to be in there, can't you? And that's just, that's not the position that a club with that much history and standing would expect to be in. So they'll have to change it because, you know, and it must hurt as well. It must hurt to look at Liverpool just going what they've done in the last few seasons as an Everton fan, because there was a time, it's hard to remember, there was a time when they were pretty much neck and neck, you know, and now
you get games at Goodison where it'd be 4-3 for a lot of it, and another team who were champions 7 years ago of the Premier League and won the FA Cup a few years ago, Leicester, who've now gone down. Do you think that was just the opposite of Everton, bad decisions at the wrong time? Because they sacked their manager and I don't know, I can't remember any good recruitment that they've done that's changed their team really.
I mean, they didn't recruit, did they? That I think was the massive thing at Leicester. Sorry, who did they sign last summer? Pretty much nobody. Like, they didn't sign anyone, did they? And so everyone else was improving their squads, and Leicester stayed exactly where it was, and it wasn't good enough to kind of, you know, to maintain that, because a lot of the sort of their key players were getting older and you know just not, you know, Johnny Evans, for example, spent quite a bit of the season injured. They lost Schmeichel, which was a massive loss.
Why did he go to Nice?
I think he just fancied a change, didn't he? I think he, you know, perhaps wasn't as happy with things. And then obviously Jamie Vardy, they've relied on for years. You know, he's effectively almost collecting his pension now. So, I mean, I'm really surprised that Leicester have gone down because of the players they've got. Yeah. You know, really, Maddison, Barnes, you know, they're England players, potentially, cusp of being England players. Yeah. You know,
Vardy was one time like a Harry Kane for England.
Yeah, and you know, Iheanacho's, you know, I think a decent striker, and then of course they've got Tielemans.
Tielemans,
you know, a good player. Dewsbury Hall was brilliant last season, and he's had a few. So, and even, you know, the fullbacks Thomas and Justin, and there's players all the way through that team that I think are good players, but it just hasn't gelled. And they, you know, I think. I don't think they should have got rid of Brendan Rodgers. I think he would have probably done enough to get him out of it. But they did. You know, then they brought in Dean Smith. You know, you didn't have time to work with that team. It's just been such a strange season with Leicester, because they just seem to have sort of, you know, steadily sunk all season, didn't they? They started off badly for Rodgers, then they improved and looked like they were going to sort of head towards mid-table, and then they sank like a stone again. And you know, I think it's a shame, because I think there's a lot of people that are quite fond of Leicester because of that championship winning season they had a few years back when they, you know, won the Premier League, and everyone kind of thought it was quite romantic and everything. Opinion of it. So, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Everton, some of the really big turning points was when they were at home against Liverpool. And I thought they could get a point there, because they always turn up against Liverpool and then they lose 3-0, 3-1. And, you know, there was just no... I remember at one point there was absolutely just no spirit, no fight to stay up. And Everton had that, really. And it was Leicester and Leeds that didn't. And Leeds as well, we went to watch the West Ham Leeds game, and that was a game that they needed to win. You know, they had Tottenham, which was now a 4-1 loss, apparently they were playing for their lives against us, you know. But it looked nothing like that. And what was it, 3-1? But yeah, that's right. 3-1 to
it was
West Ham.
3-1 West Ham. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. What can you say about Leeds? I mean, you know, I heard Jamie Carragher talk about it recently, and he was saying, you know, they've just had totally different identities with each manager. You know, if you go back to Brighton, what Brighton did is they took what Potter had done and they built on it. Whereas Leeds, you know, had a very, very strong identity under Bielsa. Then Jesse Marsh took some of it and tried to build on it and seemed to be going somewhere with it, but not brilliantly. And then they've brought in managers since then that have just totally changed the style. It's hard, isn't it? You know what it's like as a player. You know, if you've got one manager telling you one thing and then the next week you're doing something else, and then with like the 5 biggest games of your season coming up, they change the manager again. You know, it's just, you know, crazy really. And you know, I've got a fondness for Leeds as a place because I worked there for a lot of years, and so I know like what it meant to the place to have a Premier League football team. It's a massive city. Yeah. But ultimately, the way the football team has performed and the way it's been run, they don't deserve to be in the Premier League, you know, and that's a real shame.
And the team that got relegated almost a month ago now, Southampton, the last team we'll talk about, they've always just been a mid-table team. You know, haven't they got Europe a season ago, like a few seasons ago,
first season
and so. And now finishing rock bottom with about 25 points, it would be now. It's just been shambolic for them, really. And because they've been rock bottom for almost the whole season, people have just sort of gotten used to it, and it's not really been talked about as much now. But where did they finish last season? It was 12th or something.
13th, something like that.
So, just a really bad downfall. And do you think that was, again, manager recruitment and player recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, they got rid of Hasenhüttl early, didn't they? Which sometimes helps you as a team. But I don't think he was really doing anything that wrong. I mean, you know, if Southampton were expecting he was going to make him a top 6 team this year, you know, but he started okay, not fantastic, but he wasn't doing any worse than quite a few other teams. And then, you know, they changed it for a manager that just couldn't do the job. Yeah. You know, but again, you know, he'd been there for a while, hadn't he, Hasenhüttl? He'd got an identity, he'd got that particular way of playing. You know, he played that 4-2-2-2, you know, formation, and he'd got the players working in that system. And then they were playing the whole system, like all the youth team were playing that system. That was the club's identity. And then they brought in a new manager, changed that up. Didn't give him much time to embed what he wanted. He didn't look like he knew what he was doing. And then changed the manager again. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, ultimately, I think on paper they haven't got that many good Premier League players either, have they? You know, there's only perhaps 3 or 4 in there that you would look at and go, well, they're players I'd want in my team. But nevertheless, again, you know, where other teams have managed to compensate for that with team spirit and, you know, a bit of craft and so on, Southampton just couldn't do it.
I looked at a animated table and it showed on one side what had happened through the season, and Southampton were mid-table. Hasenhüttl was sacked, and slowly they just started going down until they were rock bottom, and then they just stayed there. Yeah. So I do think that was probably a huge factor of it. Anyway, cheers for watching. Got Dad on today. I'm Callum.
I'm Adam, the dad.
Very good. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Tune in next time where we'll probably talk about the flop of the season, best player of the season, manager of the season, underrated player, overrated player, and probably a few more things. Cheers for watching. Goodbye.